Hello, everyone. This is M.R. Rangaswami. I'm here with the global CEO of Deloitte, Punit Renjen, who will be with us for the next 30 or so minutes to talk about unstoppable India. But I have to say, Punit is the unstoppable Indian, having grown up in India, come to the US, worked at Deloitte for 30 plus years, and now the global CEO. So welcome, Punit.
Well, thank you, MR, and thank you for that introduction.
And again, Punit, I've been reading up a lot of you. I've also gotten to know you over time, but trying to do some fact checks and looking at your background, you had a pretty challenging time as a young boy. You then managed to come to the US on a Rotary scholarship. Why don't you walk us through the early days and some of the challenges you faced that kind of made you unstoppable at this time?
Well, in some respects, I had a wonderful childhood. I grew up in Rohtak, Haryana, and went to boarding school when I was 7 years old. The first challenge, I guess, that I recognized was when my father, who was a businessman, ran out of money when I was about 14 years of age, and I had to come back from Sanar and then go to the local school. And work, frankly, in my father's factory. My brother and I would go to school and come back and do our shift working the porcelain factory. And so it was a learning experience. It was certainly different than what my colleagues that were still in boarding school were going through. But in hindsight, it gave me some of the skills that have made me successful how do you overcome adversity, how do you work as a team, as a family, and how do you try and not get defined or validated by somebody else because they are in the moment doing better than you are. You're absolutely right. What changed my life was that I was awarded a Rotary Foundation scholarship from Northern India. I was given $40,000 plus a plane ticket. And they asked, I had designated the United States as one of the places when I'd applied for the scholarship that I would like to go if I was lucky enough to win it. And they picked Oregon. So sight unseen, never been on an airplane, never been outside of India. I show up in Oregon and I picked the best liberal arts college in Oregon, Willamette University, and that's where I ended up. And so that's a very quick thumbnail of my early days in India. My family still lives in the same house that I grew up in. My mother, who's now 81 years old, is still there, and I love going back.
Fantastic! What an inspiring journey to come to the U.S. and to be here and part of our society here, Punit. And the next thing you did was looking at your background and talking to you. You've been at one company other than your father's factory, but there's been only one company you've been working at for 30 plus years, right? And so what made you make that decision? Because you could have along the way jumped off and done something else, or started your own company, and so many things, so many opportunities afforded yourself. So walk us through the 30 plus years of being at one place and what that's meant to you.
Well, listen, I'm biased. I've been with Deloitte 36 years, and I started as an analyst. Deloitte is a wonderful organization. There aren't very many organizations, at least in the professional world, that have I'm the first brown individual to make it to global CEO in any of the big four, any of the large professional services firms. And it says a lot about my organization. It's given me an opportunity to really be an entrepreneur, if you will, within the umbrella of Deloitte. I've had an opportunity to learn a craft, become very good at that craft because I've practiced it. I've been mentored by others, and so it's given me that opportunity. I've been able to solve some of very difficult problems that companies face, that communities face. Again, Deloitte has given me that opportunity. And I'll be truthful with you. In my 36 years, every 3 to 4 years, not more recently, but early on in my career, I reassessed whether I should be with Deloitte or not. And I've had opportunities. Even when I became CEO, I've had opportunities to go become a public company CEO. And invariably, I've come back and stayed with Deloitte because it gives me the opportunity to work with wonderful people, incredibly smart, that are solving some of the most complex, difficult problems in the world, and to be able to create an impact, not only for the people that I work with, but for the clients that I serve and for the communities that we live and work in. But it's not been all a bed of roses. I mean, I'm happy to share with you in a transparent way what it has been. I came to the United States in the early 80s, that there weren't, MR, you might know this, but there weren't that many Indians.
Right.
I remember going for one of my interviews, and frankly, I didn't know that I wanted to be a management consultant and be with Touche Ross, which was the firm that I joined before merged with the Deloitte Haskins and Sells to create Deloitte. I was rejected, and I have the rejection letter by Deloitte Haskins and Sells. And Touche Ross gave me an opportunity to come and interview. And when you're an immigrant, particularly in the 1980s, this was before a lot of Indians came and started working on H-1B visas. You took that opportunity. I remember going to an interview at Touche Ross, one of 13, 14 interviews, and one of the last interviews I went to. And by the way, our firm is completely different. It's a wonderful, wonderful organization, and I'm a testament to that. But I go to my last interview. It's with the person who runs the Seattle office. He's an Englishman. He's sitting there looking at my resume, and he looks up at me and he says, "Indian?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "We had one other Indian before you, and he was no good. Do you know Bhomi Parak?" And I looked and I said, "There's no way that I'm getting this job." And I said, "John, there are 550 million Indians, and unfortunately, I don't know Bhomi Parak." But that was the situation in the early 80s. And I was lucky enough to get that job, 1984, by 85, 86, something like that, as a young analyst. And I've had the opportunity to work at my firm and rise through the ranks to become global CEO. I also have to tell you, I mean, one other anecdote, which might, for some of the younger people, it might help. You know, I was in professional services firms. One of the greatest accomplishments, and MR, you know this from your background, one of the greatest accomplishments is when you are elected to partnership. You work 10, 12, 15 years, learn your craft, become very good at it, and then the firm decides, you know, they're going to make you a partner. In 1994, I was completely burnt out. I'd worked with the firm for 7 or 8, 9 years. I'd worked, you know, crazy hours, and I decided to take a sabbatical. I went to my firm and I said, I want to take a sabbatical. This was before firms even had terms like sabbaticals. And I remember people telling me, "Why are you doing that? This is the dumbest thing that you could be doing, because you are passing up on a potential opportunity to become a partner. And even if you do come back, and 2, 3 years, you will pass up, you will give everybody else the opportunity ahead of you, and you will be behind them." I consulted with my father, who is a wonderful mentor. He's passed on, but a wonderful mentor. And he said, "Take it, do it." It was the best decision in retrospect I ever made. I met my future wife. It gave me a time to reassess and reevaluate. I came back to Deloitte. I made partner in 1996. I don't even remember who made partner in 1994, but I'm the global CEO. They're not. It's a long marathon.
Absolutely. And just as an aside, Punit, in the 1990s, I joined Deloitte for a couple of years as a management consultant as well, between 2 jobs in the tech sector.
What a small world.
It is a small world indeed. But you know, that tells the young people, maybe to digress for a minute, you know, when I talk to young people, and you do as well, I'm sure, within Deloitte and outside, as a mentor or as an advisor, and many of them come to us and say, "Should I take a gap year? Should I take a break?" And you exemplify taking that break and taking that risk in corporate life, you know, not even as a young person, right? So is that still the advice you give young people when they say, "Hey, you know, I'm trying to find my future, and what should I do?" Is that one of the things you talk to them about?
Absolutely. And I'm trying to encourage my 18-year-old son to do it before. I mean, life is a marathon. It's comprised of sprints, but within the context of a marathon. And I think absolutely taking care of yourself, exploring other opportunities, expanding beyond just professional success is incredibly important. I'm now at the stage where I'm more and looking back in terms of what I've accomplished. I mean, when I was growing up in Rohtak, I wanted to be a cricket player. Gandappa Vishwanath was my hero. Small, used to come in at number 3, a terror on the batting field as a batsman, but I didn't have the skill. And if I look back at my life's work, certainly professional success is important. And I look back with pride in terms of what I've contributed, what I've achieved. But equally important is what I'm doing beyond my professional success. What does my son, or what will my son think of me when he becomes a man? Those aspects need to be taken into account as well. And sabbaticals and taking time for yourself is incredibly important.
Great, thank you, Punit. Now you're running a $50 billion plus firm, 350,000 employees. You have such a vantage point. You talk to Fortune 500 CEOs and clients all the time. So when you look at entrepreneurship, what are the entrepreneurs in the audience now listening to us? What is the advice you want to give to the entrepreneur community? That's question one. And a follow-on to that would be, what does Deloitte do in terms of working with entrepreneurs in the tech sector?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. First, Deloitte in itself, the way that we are organized, really encourages entrepreneurship within our four walls, if you will. I mean, every day, 15,000 partners and managing directors and 350,000 professionals work with clients trying to solve their most difficult problems, whether it is in the tech digitization, cyber, it's strategy, technology. We also work with communities trying to address some of the most pressing problems that we are confronted with, whether it's climate, education, how do we address income inequality. And it requires a real entrepreneur mindset. And so I think that's the beauty and the wonder of Deloitte. We've been around for 175 years, the largest professional services firm in the world, the first professional services firm in the world to break 50 billion in revenue. My advice to entrepreneurs is, first and foremost, aspire to something that you really care about. Second, have a mindset where you have nothing to lose. And it's easier said than done. Certainly, you need to care deeply about what you're trying to do. But if you have this mindset that you have nothing to lose and that all that is required of you is to give it your best, the likelihood of you succeeding goes up. The third thing that I would suggest to them is that if you've got to look at this journey, as I said, as a marathon that is comprised of sprints. And if you take that perspective, it gives you an opportunity to try something. If you don't succeed, learn from it, go on to the next sprint, at the same time, take care of yourself. And so I think, those are some initial pieces of advice that I would give to entrepreneurs, and what I talk to people within Deloitte as well. I talk with no arrogance, with humility, that I've learned a craft. I've become really good at what I do. And the reason why I've become really good at what I do is because I've spent time, years, and I've had fabulous mentors. And so even for entrepreneurs, seek mentors. And when you have an opportunity, pass it down, mentor others. What you get out of that is, it can't be quantified.
I agree, Punit, and well put, because you got to have a purpose as an entrepreneur, because just setting a goal of, I want to be a unicorn company, is meaningless because it doesn't get you to the end game, right? It's a purpose of you building the company that eventually might make you a unicorn. But having unicorn as the goal doesn't seem like the right thing to do.
I completely agree. And this notion of purpose, particularly if you want to build a long, a successful firm that sustains over a period of time, needs to go beyond just the profit motive. Beyond, I'm going to create a unicorn that's going to be very successful. it must address something that solves a particular problem. I mean, I'll take Deloitte. It's a purpose-driven organization. Our purpose is to make an impact that matters for our clients, for our people, and for the communities that we live and work in. For our clients, it means that every single time creating a tangible, measurable, attributable impact. For our people, it means hiring the very best people, motivating them, mentoring them, and creating an environment where they can do the very best work. And for our communities, it means giving back to our communities where we live and work. And we measure this. And I think it is actually not a coincidence that over the last 7 years, we have outgrown every single one of our competitors. And we have become the #1 professional services firm. At the same time, we give 3% of our distributable earnings back into the communities that we live and work in. No professional services firm comes close.
Wow.
It's this purpose-driven notion. I would say this to people that are thinking of starting their own company. You have to have a purpose that is unique to you, that goes beyond the profit motive. If you will allow me, I want to share with you one other aspect. You know, we've got a commitment around net zero, and people ask me, why is it? And we've made a commitment that will be net zero 2030. In fact, I believe there will be net zero much before then. And the reason is quite simple. It is certainly the right thing to do. But I have 350,000 professionals, as you said. 86% of them are Gen Zs and millennials. I survey them regularly. Their #1 issue to me is, what is Deloitte doing beyond its core profit motive? What is it doing to try and address issues like climate? So it is not only the right thing to do, it is the right business thing to do. This year, we will hire 70,000 professionals all over the world. I speak at university campuses. It's one of the most motivating things that I do. Invariably, I'm asked, whether I'm speaking in India, in the United States, in Europe, what does Deloitte do beyond its core profit motive? So if I want to hire the very best individuals, I want to retain the very best individuals, I must have a purpose that goes beyond the bottom line, beyond creating a world-class unicorn, to use your analogy.
Yeah, I agree, Punit, because I think all the things you mentioned here can be used by a startup, can be used by a tech entrepreneur, because they all have to have purpose, but they all need to hire the best employees. They need to retain the best employees. And as you know, in the tech sector, attrition rates are appalling. And so, you know, an entrepreneur has to think the same way you do as a global CEO, because he also or she has to give back. So the philanthropic motive of a tech company is also equally important. And many of them haven't set those in place yet. And I think it's a great point you bring up that, you know, as part of a startup, they need to have that built in as well. So I think these are amazing points you make in terms of showing success, but also telling entrepreneurs to do the same thing that you are, right? And proof is in the pudding.
Absolutely. And what we've also done is, it's also important then, once you start generating that success, to communicate that. We communicate that regularly with our partners and with our people, and we've convinced them now. And we're owned by the 15,000 partners that own the, you know, all these different partnerships. And we have 350,000 professionals. I think we're all growing in the same direction. The fact that we're outgrowing our competition tells me that we are doing something at clients that gives us that opportunity to outgrow our competition. Clients are hiring us more often than they're hiring our competitors. And it is all a self-fulfilling virtuous cycle. And it applies to a $50 billion organization. It also applies to a startup.
Yeah, fantastic. Now tell us a little bit more, Punit, as to how Deloitte engages with entrepreneurs, because you have a whole software ecosystem, you have solutions, you have products and such. How does an entrepreneur who's listening to us now say, you know what, I really am impressed with Deloitte. How do I engage with them?
Well, many of the problems that we are addressing for clients require an ecosystem response. Increasingly, core competencies don't reside within the four walls of an organization. Now, our ecosystems involve large tech companies like SAP and Google and others, but they also involve startups and entrepreneurs that are focused on a particular problem that we are trying to address. Healthcare is one such example. And so they can certainly engage with ideas that will help us address some of the pressing problems that we're trying to solve. That's one. Second, we work with entities like the World Economic Forum. We've come up with a software tool called Uplink, where we engage with entrepreneurs primarily to address more community and global issues, whether it's climate, income inequality, education, etc. That's a direct way for startups to engage through Uplink. We've got 40,000 startups and entrepreneurs that are engaging with us. That number is going up every day. That's another example as to how to engage with Deloitte and how we enable the startup community.
No, that's terrific. And I guess in India you have a big presence. Talk to us a little bit about that, what your presence in India is and so forth. That would be helpful.
We have 90,000 professionals in India. We've been in India for 125 years, and we're growing rapidly. I expect to hire another 75,000 professionals over the next few years. We are also engaged in India on multiple levels. We are certainly helping clients and communities within India address issues in India, but we're also using our talent in India, which is exceptional, to help global clients. And so India is unique in that respect. About, as I said, 90,000, I'm trying to do math in my head, but 15-20% of our global footprint now is in India. So India is a very important country for us. What we are also trying to do in India is give back to our community, but do it in a very unique way. Let me talk about one such initiative. We launched an initiative called World Class. As I told you, we give 3% of our distributable income, which is what the partners finally distribute amongst themselves, back into the communities that we live and work in. One of the things that we realized a few years ago, that our most precious asset is not the money that we give, it is the 350,000 professionals. How do we engage them, and what is the core competence and skill that they have that they can give back to their communities? And we realized it is their time and it is their skill set. So we launched a commitment that we will take 100 million people out of poverty through education. In India, that problem is even more, is quite acute. 175 million women and girls in India are illiterate. And because they're illiterate, they're not going to be able to take advantage of this wonderful journey that India is on to become the third largest economy. I'm very gung-ho about India. And so what we have committed is that we will work with other NGOs and we will impact 50 million women and girls by providing them with skills and education so that they can take part in this wonderful journey that India is going on. Now, this world-class initiative is different in different countries. In the United States, the issue is in minority communities, how do we keep them in school so that they can go to college? And so our commitment in the United States is to do that. In China, it is around left behind children. In Papua New Guinea, is working with seaweed farmers so that they don't get squeezed by the middle person. So I gave you the example of world class, but in India, it's 50 million women and girls. And I think, and we're having a really good impact, more work to do still.
Thank you, Punit. I have to applaud you for that personally. I mean, the commitment of such a big number, and then, like you said, you're measuring and managing that. So, you will know along the way how you're doing, but also you'll get the thing done, right? Like Peter Drucker said, you can't manage what you can't measure, right? So
that's exactly right. That is exactly right. In India, the other thing, I've said this in other interviews, MR, is that, climate is an issue that we have to address as a global community. I think it's a bigger issue than the pandemic that we've just navigated. India can take a leadership role. And I think, things like stubble burning, which impacts Rohtak, for instance, every fall. There are problems that can be addressed, and we are going to do our part.
No, that's fantastic. And so now let's move from the 50 million women and girls in India to the Gen Z. I mean, we hear so much about the Gen Z community, the great resignation. They do not want to work as maybe hard as the millennials or the previous generation. There's so much noise and information about the Gen Z community. So what are you looking at in terms of that workforce? How did they fit in? What are the special techniques to get them on board and keep them with you? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think there's a lot of misperception around the Gen Zs. My research and my interaction, as I said, 86% of my professionals are millennials and Gen Z, so a big portion. My interaction with them has taught me a few things. One, I think they're prepared to work as hard as you and I did. But I think they take a more holistic perspective. So things like purpose, things like giving back to the communities that we live and work in are very, very important to them. And they will associate with an entity, they will associate with a firm and an organization that does that in a credible, authentic way. And that is why it's so important for an organization like ours to have a purpose that is authentic to us and that goes beyond just the core profit motive. I think that is unique to them. I mean, we certainly did that, MR, growing up when we thought about the communities that we lived and worked in, but it was more volunteer work. You did this in the evening and on your own time. Now it is a core part of what one needs to do. The other thing that Gen Zs want is experiences, and they want to learn and grow, and they don't want to be typecast and do one thing over and over again. And that actually works to a startup, and it works to a entity like ours that gives people an opportunity to try different things, to learn different things, to get good at a craft. I think that is something that Gen Zs are more pronounced towards than we were, maybe. But some of the same things that you and I, in the least I was motivated by, is making an impact, doing something that satisfies me professionally and personally, making choices that are more holistic, taking care of myself and my family. I think those are the same things that Gen Zs, I believe, are motivated by.
And what would be your advice? I know there's been this great resignation we've all talked about in the media. So what is your advice to the Gen Z community in terms of their future and what they should be looking at and doing?
Well, I'm in no position to give advice. I think, I mean, what I can tell you is from my own life experience, and I say this to my son, who at the age that he is, he's a wonderful young man, but, he thinks he knows a lot of things more than I do. All I tell him is that I've lived life longer than you have. So if you take my advice in that context, that I've lived life more than you have, my take would be, and I've said this a couple of times, life is a marathon. So pace yourself, enjoy yourself, take time to smell the roses. I mean, I can say that I didn't do it as much as I did. It's a regret that I have as I was going through the journey. The journey is as important as the destination. In a way, the Indian way of living, you remember, you read the Bhagavad Gita and there's that discourse that Krishna gives Arjun on the battlefield when they're aligned across the Kauravas there, and Arjun hesitates and he says, I can't fight. Of course, there's a little bit of anxiousness. And Krishna says, it's your duty. The process, you are a Khatri. The process of actually doing this and discharging your duty is as important as whether you will win or not. So it goes back to the Indian way of living. And I think we should embrace that. I think that's one piece of advice that I would give. The second piece of advice is passion certainly matters. Hard work matters even more than passion. If you know exactly what you want to do and you have a passion for it, you will need to work hard at it. You might find yourself in a position like me. I didn't know at a young age exactly what I needed to do, but I was hardworking. I put my head down, I learned a craft, and I taught myself to love it. And I think that is equally important, if you will, to that. And then I think the last point that I would make is remember what this is all about. when you get to my age and you are looking in the mirror and thinking about what you have done with your life, I think you will certainly celebrate what you have done professionally. But what would be equally important is what you have done with your friends, with your family, with your children, if you have children, and what they think of you. Ultimately, in the end analysis, that's what matters. Professional success comes and goes. I'm going to retire from my job. They might remember me for a week, but then they will move on. That old adage, MR, the king is dead, long live the king. They'll move on. They will not build a statue in my honor. They will not name a Deloitte University in my honor. But who will remember me? My wife, my mother, my son, and my friends. And that matters equally.
Well put, Punit. I would like to conclude on that positive note, and thank you once again for the sage advice you've given from your vantage point, both growing up in India and becoming CEO of a large global company, to speaking from your heart. I think that'll stand our audience in good stead. So thank you once again for joining us, and we will keep track of your future as well. Thank you.
Thank you.